Starting in 1945, the Sharifs began to look at the field of social in-group. Let me dust off my dictionary for a second for the official definition. An in-group is a small group of people in an organisation or society whose members share the same interests, language, etc., and try to keep other people out. The Sharifs sought to artificially create in-groups amongst young boys to see if they could turn these groups against one another to study the inter-group conflict. The first experiment would take place in the summer of 1949 with 24 white 12-year-old boys from lower middle-class Protestant backgrounds at an isolated camp in Middle Grove. It would be funded by Yale University and the Department for Scientific Research of the American Jewish Community. The reason for all the children having the same background was to eliminate differences apart from personality between the boys. Sharif would, for the experiment, disguise himself as Mr. Musée, the camp caretaker, as a way for him to observe the behaviour of his subjects. The experiment would be formed of 3 stages. The first consisted of all the boys taking part in activities amongst each other and were allowed to form friendships. After a while, the 24 boys were divided into 2 groups. The experimenters deliberately separated the budding friendships in their selection of each cohort of 12 children. From then on, stage 2 commenced, where each group would only be allowed to interact within each other. This was to try and establish an in-group mentality. The team buildings were conducted where a common goal appealed to all in the group. By the end of this stage, Sharif noted that friendships were bonding within the individual groups and a hierarchical structure had formed. They found that the boys preferred interacting with their own in-group over the other. Although this seems like a clean-cut hypothesis confirmation, it wasn't so perfect, but we'll discuss that later on. Now, with the 2 groups, stage 3 would involve adversarial competition. It was observed that the 2 groups would act hostile to one another, and although acting democratically internally in their 12-strong teams, the boys didn't conduct themselves accordingly with the outgroup. Sharif tried to restore harmony at the end of the study by giving the boys a common enemy to unite against. They did this by beating a softball team from outside the camp, although tensions still existed between the 2 groups. With these promising results, the Sharifs sought out to expand upon the subject of in-groups. This brings us on to the 1953 Sharifs' next experiment into inter-group behaviour. The study would follow the same lines as the 1949 experiment, but would employ greater laboratory controls. We would only get to stage 2 before being terminated early. Sharif would later say in his 1961 Robbers Cave book on the reason for the failed experiment. Owing to various difficulties and unfavourable conditions, including errors of judgment in the direction of the experiment. But Sharif's seemingly dismissive comment on the study actually glosses over the real reason, but that will be revealed later on. This meant that a rerun was in order, and with the remaining grant money burning a hole in Sharif's pocket, this finally brings us on to the Robber Cave study of 1954.